You are listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with Associate Principal Viola of the Met Opera Orchestra, Craig Mumm. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You're the first violist on the show, so you're going to have to spill all the beans for us about everything.
Okay.
I would love to chat with you about your incredibly musical family. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and all of the musicians who filled your life?
Well, I come from a very musical family. In fact, when I was a little kid growing up, I just assumed that everybody's parents were musicians. It never occurred to me that people had other jobs. My grandfather was a band leader during World War One. He led a Wisconsin field artillery band during World War One.
Amazing.
My grandmother was a saxophonist, and she toured the country in the teens and the roaring 20s in an all-girl saxophone band. And if you've seen the movie Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe, it must have been kind of like that, kind of a wild scene.
Have you ever been told anything about how that group formed and how she got involved in that?
I don't know. I wish I had asked her.
Yeah.
I don't know how that formed. But she was very petite, so they gave her the soprano saxophone.
Aw.
And the more substantial women were playing the bari sax, and it was very humorous. The pictures that I've seen.
Absolutely.
But they were musicians. My father was a violinist. He was a concertmaster of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra.
Wow.
But before Milwaukee, he was a staff musician at WGN Radio in Chicago. And in those days, we're talking about the 40s and 50s, staff musicians did whatever was needed at the radio station. This was before television. So he was concertmaster of the radio orchestra, but he also played whatever they needed him for. He had a live radio program called Eddie Mumm and the Country Fair Boys.
Wow.
And they did kind of Hollywood arrangements of country tunes, and he'd sing. He was a fine singer also. He'd sing and they'd play some country tunes, and then it was a noon hour program for the farmers. So after a couple of songs, they would give the soybean reports and the house pork bellies selling this week. And then they'd go back to live songs. Before he left Chicago, WGN for the Milwaukee Symphony, his last position at WGN was playing trumpet in the Bozo Circus band.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, my dad was an all-round fine musician. He could play a lot of instruments. So he was playing trumpet for Bozo Circus. It was a live kids program.
That's amazing.
And then he left and became concertmaster of the Milwaukee Symphony.
So what is it like when you're having those radio jobs? Was he basically going into work each day and then would get a roster of what he was going to be doing?
Yes. Well, he had his set programs, the circus program and the Eddie Mumm and the Country Fair Boys. That was a 5 days or 6 days a week live radio. But before that, in the 40s, before television, they had regular symphony orchestra concerts. They'd rehearse and give on-the-air concerts. You can get an idea of what that was like if you look on old videos on YouTube of Toscanini conducting the NBC Symphony.
Right,
New York.
right.
They did live broadcasts. They'd have a studio audience, but they would do broadcasts.
Wow, how amazing.
So that was my parents and grandparents. My wife is a violinist, Marianne, and she played with me 17 years at the Met.
Wow.
But now she's teaching full-time at Montclair State University in New Jersey. And both of our children are professional musicians. My daughter, Andrea, is a harpist, and she's principal harp of the Charlotte, North Carolina Symphony. And my My son-in-law is a singer, actually, and he started a Bach festival in Charlotte, a very successful Bach Academy. My son, Daniel, is a cellist, and he lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and he plays with the Charleston Symphony, but he also is the principal cello of the Augusta, Georgia Symphony and the Asheville, North Carolina Symphony, and he plays with the Virginia Symphony. But all of these, of course, are kind of on hold right now with the pandemic, waiting for the live symphony concerts to come back.
Absolutely, like all of us. So then what is your family's philosophy? Because that's amazing to have grandparents, parents, son, and then grandchild all as professional musicians. How did you raise music in your family? What was it like?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, I as a kid, I just figured everybody was a musician. I didn't know any better, so it was very natural to me. And I used to go to my dad's symphony concerts, and I was just enthralled. I thought it was so exciting. He was concert master of the symphony, and I felt like he was a rock star. It was very exciting, and I love music. I love classical music, so it just seemed natural to me. I studied violin with my dad, and later went on to college and studied with Shmuel Ashkenazi, the first violinist of the Vermeer String Quartet. This was in Illinois, but my heart was always with the viola. I just loved the timbre of the instrument, the sound of the instrument, and it was just my voice. And I, little by little, I gravitated away from the violin and more toward the viola.
Was there a specific time where you made the change to say, okay, now I'm just focusing on viola, or is it always something where you can kind of go back and forth?
Well, I can go back and forth. I
Hmm.
never forgot how to play the violin, but it's just,
Right.
it was a gradual shift. When I before the Met, I was playing with the Lyric Opera of Chicago. I've got a lot of
Hmm.
opera experience. I was playing violin and then viola in the opera.
Wow.
But at that time, there was a lot of jingle work in Chicago, actually, more jingle work in Chicago than in New York. So I was freelancing, very busy playing jingles, everything
Wow.
from United Airlines to kitty litter to you name it. We
So how
did
did you get
commercials.
pulled into that?
Well, I happen to know some of the contractors, and I guess they liked my playing, so they'd call up and say, "I need a violinist for a 2 hour session for Depends underwear or whatever it was. It didn't matter
Right.
the product or Goya coffee or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Hey, we have a 2 hour jingle session for a 60-second spot. Can you do this? I say yes. And of course, sometimes they'd say we need a viola. Sometimes we need a violin. Fortunately, I
Wow.
could play both, and I made a lot more money that way. I very often I'd go to I think it was Universal Studios in Chicago. They had several studios, and so I'd bring both instruments. So I'd be playing a jingle in Studio A, and then somebody'd come in and say, "We need a violist in Studio B in half an hour." So I'd say, "I'm here.
Wow.
I can do it." So I got a lot of work that way. You really have to be professional to do the jingle recording because you're expected to come in and from seeing the music for the first time to having it recorded and ready to go out on the air, it has to be done within an hour, or sometimes it's even a
Wow.
shorter session. So you don't have time to practice the music or to ask too many questions, or you have to be able to come in and sight read well and be very efficient with time because the studio rates were expensive
Right.
for doing jingles.
So amazing sight readers and just real professional, get it
Yeah,
done.
you have to be very quick, very professional, and sight read well. You have to focus on the basic things like playing excellent ensemble playing and excellent intonation. You can't afford to be a little bit off from the piano or your rhythm not quite with the rhythm section. You have to really focus on the basics for
It's
jingles.
That's fabulous practice for future
Oh yeah.
ensemble playing. So, as a parent of professional musicians and as a son of a professional musician, what was teaching the art of practice like? And how did you what did you learn from your dad and how did you do that for your kids to have them both be successful?
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a tough question. Hmm. Well, I was more diligent with my children, with our children, uh, getting them on a practice regimen than my dad was with me.
Mhm.
With me, I just kind of absorbed it by osmosis. My dad was always running out the door to a gig or running to a rehearsal, and the lessons with him were catch as catch can.
Yeah.
But I'd hear him playing around the house, and I just kind of absorbed things. And occasionally he'd ask me, "Oh, did you practice?" And I'd occasionally say, "Yeah, I practiced a little bit." But you know what? It's the practicing for me didn't start seriously until I decided that I really wanted to do this as a living for a living.
Right. Right.
And then once I decided that, nobody had to tell me to practice. It's just something I love to do.
Absolutely. Do you think there was a performance or a moment where you really made that choice for yourself, where you knew undoubtedly this is what you wanted to do?
Well, no, not one specific performance, but I would go hear my dad's concerts, and I remember hearing him play the big violin solo in Ein Heldenleben, the
Mm,
Strauss tone poem, and it was so beautiful and it was so moving, and I thought, geez, I really want to do this. This is a great way to spend your life. It's at that time it didn't occur to me how much money I was going to make. That it's just something that I wanted to do. Um, and if I could make a living at it, that was an added bonus. But it didn't occur to me to think, well, I could make more as a doctor, or I could get rich as a stockbroker. That never crossed my mind. It's just something that I wanted to do. I felt a passion for the music. So
yeah, a calling.
a calling,
Um,
exactly.
so you were playing in the lyric opera. So you had some opera chops and opera rep under your belt. What was
Yes.
your trajectory to get to the Met? How many
Well,
auditions did you take? What was the experience for you?
I've been very successful with auditions in my career. I've won maybe 25% of my auditions that I've taken,
Wow.
which is an extraordinarily high rate.
Yes.
Yeah, most people take audition after audition after audition before, and that's normal. That's the way
Yeah.
it should be. So I've been very lucky. You know, can we talk about auditions a little bit while we're on
I
that
would
subject?
I would love to hear what you have to say about auditions.
Things have changed a lot, and unfortunately, I think auditions are much tougher than they used to be. Maybe that's why I had a lot of success taking auditions because they weren't this tough when I was taking auditions 40 years ago.
Mhm.
Uh, the competition is very stiff now, and as a young musician, if you can uh, progress past the first round or even make it to a final round occasionally, you're
Mhm.
doing great. You're doing better than the vast majority of people. Auditions are really tough. In my father's generation, it was completely different. I remember my one of my teachers, Bernie Zasloff, a wonderful violist. He was a famous quartet player. Played in the Vermeer String Quartet, the Fine Arts Quartet, the Composers Quartet. Uh, he grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He was a lifelong New Yorker. One day, and he was a well-known freelancer in New York. He's playing everything from Beethoven string quartets to the Radio City Rockettes show and
Wow.
jingles, and but that's what freelancers did, and he made a great living at it. Actually, when he was going into music, it was a tough call because his family had a very successful plumbing supply business in Brooklyn, and his family thought this was crazy for him to go into music. He could make a fortune in the plumbing business.
Right, right. It's
But
amazing.
but his love was music. His heart was in music. So he was very successful in music. So one day he gets a call from George Sell, who was the conductor of
Wow.
the Cleveland Orchestra, and great conductor and a great orchestra, the Cleveland Orchestra, one of the best. So George Sell calls him up and says, "Bernie, we have an opening for assistant principal viola in the Cleveland Orchestra. Can you do it?" And Bernie thought, "Oh, okay, I'll come and do it." That was the audition.
Oh my
There
gosh.
was there was no audition. The conductor called you and said, "Do you want this job?"
And you say
So,
yes.
so Bernie said, "Okay, he'll come." But for Bernie, it was a tough call because he was so busy in New York, and in
Wow.
those days, for a lifelong New Yorker, moving from Brooklyn to Cleveland, Zell might have as well have said, "You have to move to Siberia." I mean, it
Yeah.
was like who would
Cool.
who would leave New York to go to Cleveland? Was
Right.
his thought. But he stayed a couple of years and enjoyed it. But his heart was in chamber music,
Wow.
so he came back. But anyway, the point of my long-winded story is that auditions have changed a lot. There were no auditions in my dad's generation. My generation, the auditions were tough, but not unreasonable. But now, man, you have to really have everything, your act completely together to do
Yes.
well in auditions. I guess that's the way it should be. The orchestras are looking for the very best, but the competition is very stiff. Now, speaking about auditions, that brings up a topic that's well, I suppose controversial in the classical music industry is how to promote diversity in orchestras. And now we have I think, a great audition procedure at the Met. Everything is blind audition. It's all behind a screen,
Yes.
uh, including the final round. Everything, and I can't tell you how many times I've been surprised at auditions. I'll go to the finals. I'll be listening to the finals, and I think, oh, that has to be so and so, or it has to be so and so. And they take down the screen after the audition, and I'm completely surprised. It's not anybody that I knew or recognized.
It's so
So
cool.
it's a very fair audition process, and we pick people solely on the quality of their playing, no other criteria.
Right.
However, it doesn't really do much to build diversity. But I don't think diversity, it's hard for that to be accomplished at the audition process. I think that has to be started at the very beginning of a musician's training, is how you get your start in music. I know from Anthony McGill's case, he started in Chicago, my hometown also.
Hmm.
He started in a community music school for young kids.
Yep.
That's where he got to start. And now he's principal of the New York Philharmonic. Uh,
Absolutely.
but I think that's where the diversity has to start, is in the very beginning uh, in music education.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that because I know you're very involved with Youth Orchestra of the Americas and a lot of things in South America. So, what kinds of things do you see, and are you trying to help to provide a place for students of every possible walk of life to get an instrument in their hands?
Well, yes, I traveled to South America a lot, Central America, South America, Mexico. I just really enjoy working with the talented students there. And it varies from place to place. Uh, you go to a place like Buenos Aires, and they have excellent music education and fine schools. Uh, but you go to another place like Belize or El Salvador, and it's very tough for the musicians to get the training they need. Very often they have to leave the country. Most often they have to leave the country and come to the United States or go to Europe to get the training to be high level classical musicians. They've got all the talent they need, but what they need are opportunities. So I guess that's kind of, I'm trying to help out in that. I go to usually I go to Panama and Brazil every year and teach, and it's just been a great pleasure for me working with the very eager and talented students there.
It's very exciting, and it sounds like more and more programs are being developed and employed in different areas. It seems like just getting good teachers in front of students who are ready to learn is the ultimate key.
Yes, yes, and of course, getting high quality instruments.
Yes.
It's a struggle. I know from my friends who teach woodwinds, even a simple thing like getting reeds
Yes.
is very difficult in or string players getting decent strings. It's difficult in many parts of Latin America. They're expensive and they're just not available.
Yeah.
So these are hurdles that I'm helping to overcome. When I go down to Latin America, I usually bring strings, things like that, extra bows.
It's really exciting, and I think there's so much potential. And if we've learned anything from El Sistema, it's that kids have so much potential, and when you harness it, they can do incredible things.
Oh
So,
my gosh, yeah.
and in our own country, we have so much untapped talent. We're just
Yes,
gonna we're gonna make it harder for ourselves. Auditions are gonna get even more challenging.
they will, but I guess that's the way it should be.
Exactly. So, what was your Met audition like? Is it similar to the way there's still the process still exists, or was there anything different?
No, it's the same process. When I took my audition, the Met was, well, that was 37 years ago. Was one of the only orchestras that had a blind audition for every round. I think a few orchestras now have gone to that. But at the Met audition was a little different from others in that there was no solo concerto on the list. It was strictly opera excerpts for mine. Now,
Interesting.
I was auditioning for a principal seat, so I had to play the opera solos on my audition.
Right.
The solos from Peter Grimes, from Manon Lescaut, from Arabella, various opera solos. But there was no concerto. It was strictly opera excerpts. We It depends on the instrument. We have a lot of discretion how we want to what we want to hear on the auditions. Uh, our last viola audition, I made up the list, and we put concerto on it. Actually, we had two concertos because the audition was for principal viola. So we had a Bartok concerto, we had the Stamitz viola concerto, plus I had an excerpt from a Brahms string sextet on the list. So I had a more varied
Yeah.
list than we normally have.
Fascinating. So, since you had been already at the Lyric, you had a lot of opera rep under your belt.
Yes.
I've heard a lot from Met musicians about the amazing overwhelm that comes with that first season or two, where you're given this huge stack of repertoire that you don't know well, especially as a string player. Your guys' parts are so big.
Oh yeah.
What was your, I guess, philosophy of how to tackle it, or how did you tackle all digesting all of that new repertoire that was, different from what you'd learned prior?
Well, I had played at Lyric Opera already, so I was familiar with a lot of the pieces. But you just practice the music, and the Met has a very dense and busy schedule. So I was going into work twice a day, 6 days a week. We'd have
Wow.
a rehearsal in the morning and a performance at night, or some days we'd have two rehearsals. Saturday we would do two performances. Our schedule at the Met is seven performances a week, but
Wow.
we rotate. So normally a player will play four of those seven plus rehearsals. So and every week is different. It's unlike a symphony orchestra where you have a set schedule every week that's pretty much the same. Our Met Opera schedule, sometimes we'd have one rehearsal a week, sometimes we'd have five rehearsals in a week.
Wow.
Sometimes I would play both shows on Saturday, sometimes just one. Sometimes they'd ask me to play an extra performance. I'd play a fifth performance.
Wow.
Uh, but it's exciting. In spite of the fact that we were working so many hours, it's just such great music, and my colleagues are so great, and I love to the pieces we were playing. It never felt onerous to me.
And that it's feasting your ears and your eyes, and there's so much going on.
Oh
It's
my
it's
gosh,
hard to be bored with that.
the great singing and the ballet and the costumes and the stories, these wonderful stories based on Shakespeare and other things. It's just amazing.
Yeah,
Great place to work.
it's overwhelming. What was your first concert with the Met? What was your first
Oh my!
performance?
Well, my very first. I came in the middle of the season to the Met because I had to finish out my contract at Lyric Opera first. So my very first rehearsal, I sit down on the first stand, and we're in our orchestra pit rehearsing Verdi's Macbeth. And we haven't rehearsed 5 minutes when our conductor, James Levine, leans over the podium and says to me, Craig, turn around, look at the stage. So I turn around and there's a corps of completely naked ballerinas on stage. I thought, wow, this is not your normal workplace. They were doing the witches scene from Macbeth, and this production called for naked witches. Um, but that was my first service at the Met.
That's awesome. Welcome to the Met.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's Naked Witches. Is there a piece that, as it comes around in rotation, that you just always look forward to and you can't wait to play again next time you see it come through?
Oh, there are a lot of pieces like that. Um, well, one piece that's not even an opera, but I just love, and it's such a masterpiece, is the Requiem by Giuseppe Verdi. And it's
Yeah.
just every note is perfection, and it is the most moving piece you can possibly imagine. And you don't have to be religious whatsoever to be moved to tears by the emotions in that piece. Yeah, that's a great one. The Strauss, Der Rosenkavalier. It's always so much fun to play. It's so beautiful.
Do you have a moment? I love to talk on this podcast about these magical moments where, when you're performing and everything's clicked and there's something special in the air that night, and you can feel it while you're playing that it's a time that you'll never forget. Do you have
Oh,
one of those at the Met where it just really sticks out to you as kind of an apex?
oh yes. Oh, I've got several, but what really I remember we did Rosenkavalier, Der Rosenkavalier, uh, with Carlos Kleiber, the
Oh,
German conductor, and he in his whole career he conducted very few concerts. He was very reclusive,
mhm.
but everything he did conduct was just the ultimate. But he did a run of Rosenkavalier with us, and we were the only American orchestra he ever worked with. So we felt
Wow.
very privileged. It was so moving. Every bar, every note was just magic. He brought it so to life. Uh, and the opera's long; it's about 4.5 hours. Every night when we came to the end of that opera, I swear, if he'd asked everybody in the company, "Oh, let's play it again right now," everybody would have gladly said yes. We would
Oh,
have
wow.
gladly done it again. It was just magic. I'll never remember it. And the power that Kleiber, the power is not the right word, but he had such influence. He was able to get Luciano Pavarotti to sing the role of the Italian tenor in the first act. The role is 5 minutes of singing, and that's it.
Wow.
But he was so well respected that he was able to get Pavarotti to sing this 5 minute role.
Wow.
And Pavarotti was magnificent, but I looked up and his knees were shaking, and I never saw Pavarotti with
Wow.
his knees shaking, but it was powerful and emotional for him too.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what was the experience like? What were his rehearsal technique like? How did he engage you guys to get such an incredible buy-in, immediately?
You know what? It's he was could be extremely charming, but the way he felt the music was so deep, and it had nothing to do with his baton technique. Well, I mean, which was very good, but you got the feeling he could have conducted with his feet, and it would have been
Yeah.
just as good. He had such a deep feeling for the music, you couldn't help but be drawn in. I remember he conducted Verdi's Otello with us, which is also one of my favorite operas, one of the all-time great pieces. And there's a scene where the music is supposed to imitate Otello's agitated heartbeat, the thump, the thump, the thump, his heartbeat. And I swear, Carlos Kleiber conducted it so powerfully that our hearts were beating at the same rhythm as the music.
Wow.
It really, I'm not exaggerating. It was so moving.
I believe you. I feel like having these opportunities to be with people whose passion is so great that you can't help but completely live in their universe, that
With yeah,
it's so rare and so it's just such a special and unique time to be in that space and making music with somebody who feels that strongly.
it was that way with Carlos Kleiber. You were drawn in, and it just was very powerful.
Wow.
But there are so many great singers that I've heard who gave such memorable and moving performances. One singer comes to mind is the German bass Kurt Moll, and he sang many times with us the role of Hunding in Die Walküre, Wagner. And every night he'd come in, and the first note he would sing, everybody, you got such goosebumps and chills. It was frightening. The quality of his voice, and you just were scared. And every night I knew it was coming, and it didn't matter. As soon as he opened his mouth, you just got a shock. It was
Yeah.
chilling. So
Wow.
he was one of the greats. Yeah, I recommend hearing his recordings. This past season, we had, oh God, now that I mentioned it, I can't remember her name. A tall Norwegian woman, young singer. Oh gosh, one of the greatest voices I've ever heard. Okay, you guys, she sang Queen of Spades,
Wow.
Tchaikovsky Queen of Spades with us. If you want to look it up, what we did
Yes.
this season at the Met, I can't remember her name.
Wow.
Norwegian, but it's a voice like one of the greats, one of the great voices. And she's young, she's in her 30s, but she, she just had a normal background, and she was singing in church choirs in Norway and hoping that maybe she could make it in opera. And now she's a big star. And man, what a voice! She's got an instrument like I've never heard.
And that's such an awesome thing too about being in an opera orchestra, especially over the duration of your career, to hear all of these breakout singers and see people's careers take off and getting surprised by someone like her who comes out of nowhere. It totally refreshes and renews the works that you do over and over.
Yes. Oh my gosh, does it ever? You hear these new singers and think, "Wow, where have you been all my life?" It's
Right.
it's just so wonderful.
So I would love to talk for a second about Wagner, that you brought it up, and The Ring. What is your experience in the first desk of violas? Do you guys try and switch out often? One night, next night, so that you don't die from the stress of it all, or what's your physical kind of mindset as you approach when you guys do a full ring?
Oh, usually we rotate. We rotate. Uh, I mean, I've built up such stamina after all these years playing at the Met. Uh, I could keep. It's I'm on. My body's on autopilot. I could keep playing forever.
That's
Um, my
awesome.
my body doesn't get tired, but my brain starts to wander. It's hard to concentrate for 5 hours.
Yes.
For me. That's the difficult part, to keep the focus for a long time. But that's an unusual thing about the Met Orchestra. We have very little absenteeism, very little physical problems, despite the fact that we play such long and demanding operas. I don't know if we built up a tolerance for it. I think it's is if you can find a balance with your between your body and the instrument, and then you can avoid a lot of physical issues.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because it seems like you would be more prone having these really grueling schedules, but it sounds like you kind of can't do the job unless you figure out some harmony.
You have to figure it out. You have to figure out how your body acts, how your body works with your instrument, and find a balance. Um, so it's funny at the Met. There's very little absenteeism. Uh,
That's
well,
great.
we like coming to work. We like our colleagues, and we found a balance with our bodies and the instruments.
That's something that I keep hearing over and over about your orchestra, and I just love to hear how everyone really does love their colleagues and really does love coming to work. And in addition to the fact that you have that blind final round, you've attracted for yourselves like-minded people, and it seems like you really have an amazing thing going there.
I think so. Yeah, it's an unusually nice group of people. Very cordial, friendly with each other, family oriented. My gosh, it was different when when I first started. It was mostly white men, a lot of hard drinking,
Interesting.
and now it's 50-50 women. We come in and we show pictures of our children and our grandchildren, and it's very friendly and supportive.
It's amazing.
Can I mention one of my colleagues, a violist, Marilyn Strobe?
Mhm.
She's now the person longest in the orchestra. She's been there over 60 years,
Wow.
and she's still a marvelous player. She's just terrific. But when she came in 1960, I think the orchestra was all men,
Wow.
and she faced a lot of opposition. She told me that some of the men were saying it wasn't right for them to be hiring a girl, that she was taking a job for a man with a family, taking a job from a man who needed the job. So
Wow.
things have changed. Now our orchestra is 50-50 men and women. But it wasn't
Wow.
this way years ago.
And so was she the first woman at the Met?
She, except for the harpist, the second harpist.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Wow.
but she was, except for the second harpist, she was the first woman.
And
But it
60
was,
years. That's
yeah,
an incredible tenure with that amazing
yeah.
schedule that you guys keep.
She's an amazing player. She's really
Wow.
something.
So with a schedule like that, and then you all throw teaching on top of it all, is how do you manage kind of the feast or famine? I feel like sometimes you guys get into those playing weeks, like you mentioned, where all of a sudden there's, double Saturdays and two rehearsals in the morning, and it just is chaos. How have you found your balance between that and wanting to do all the teaching that you do?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, you have to manage your time best you can.
Yeah.
Uh, there's not a lot of time for individual practice. There's just not time for that. And of course, those of us with families, you have to check on the kids' schoolwork and go to soccer practices, and
Yeah.
my case, take the kids to Manhattan School for their cello and harp lessons. And
Right.
but it's the same issues that every working parent has. You have to prioritize things.
Yep. How many students do you usually have in your studio at a time?
It depends. Every year is
Mhm.
different, and of course, this year it's fewer because of the pandemic. Some have opted to postpone
Yeah.
enrolling. So I really only have time with the Met schedule for just a small handful of students. We'll see what happens after this pandemic's over.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm really interested to see how we, kind of grow and change because we're being forced to. And this new batch of students who are just graduating, what amazing and interesting things they'll figure out to do, to kind of help themselves into the community. Um, what normally when you have your students on their way out and graduating and knowing how tough auditions are, what do you do to talk them through the preparation of kind of setting their feet out into the big world?
Well, I tell them that it's difficult to get an orchestra job, and you should have some backup. Teaching is one. A lot of my students actually do teaching, so that's a great way to stay in music and be employed. Uh, but you have to be flexible, and I know some people have started their own little orchestras or ensembles, and they're doing uh, online, like pay-per-view kind of concerts. You have to get creative. I mentioned my son's case. His symphony jobs are all on hold for now, so he's playing a lot of weddings.
Right.
And he's got the instrument in his hand, and he's making a living at it. So you it can be a tough business. So you have to be creative.
What have you been doing to keep your creative mind alive while you've been sitting at home not performing with the Met?
I'm trying to learn new pieces
That's
that
cool.
I haven't had time. Pieces that I think, oh, I should learn this piece. And during the Met schedule, I just haven't had time. Now I've
Have
got the time, so I'm learning Hindemith sonatas, viola sonatas. I'm learning some new pieces. Actually, I'm practicing the accordion. Uh,
cool.
I have an accordion, and I didn't have time to practice it. Now I'm playing around with it and practicing. Getting better at solfege, things like this. You can
That's
stay creative, and I do still am doing some teaching on FaceTime and on Zoom. So I'm doing some remote teaching.
as sad as so much of it is, having the chance to have it be quiet enough to learn new pieces and kind of delve into that box of things you wish you could do but never have time. There's something kind of liberating in getting that time to do it.
It's a real gift of time. It's unfortunate circumstances, but I'm trying to make the most of this gift of time that I normally don't have.
Thank you so much for this. This was a perfect afternoon to spend with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on Inside the Notes. Be sure to visit InsideTheNotes.com for additional content from our artists and guests, and click subscribe to stay up to date on future interviews. Until next time, this is your host, Erica Block.